gun laws versus God's law. Ooh, it's gonna be a good one tonight, y'all. But before we get into this video, I'd like to thank everybody who's been watching, liking, commenting, and sharing my videos. After all, you could be watching anybody right now, but you're tuned into me, and I appreciate that. So let's get it. The Wild Wild West. See, that's the thought that pops into my head when I think of the world we live in today. See, much like I came from an era where I can remember when everybody didn't have a cell phone, I also can remember a time when everybody didn't have a gun with them at all times. Think about this statement that I just made. It probably seems like a fairy tale make-believe world to any kid born in the 2000s. And with mass shootings seemingly happening every other week, it won't be long before something as simple as going to Walmart will be as dangerous as walking through the streets of Iraq during 9/11. It's reported that about 40% of adult Americans either own a gun or live in a household where a gun is present. Wow, 40%. What's really sad about that number is that's just the number of legally registered guns. And to top it all off, that report is from 2017. That's 5 years ago. You see, these days, the overall consensus is I'd rather have a gun and not need it than to need a gun and not have it. For the life of me, I can't see why the average person with no intentions to kill feels safer owning a gun. As a former Marine and bounty hunter, I have dealt with guns and used guns. And my experience is even a gun cannot protect you when it's your time to go. My father told me that when a person carries a gun, that they're twice as likely to grab that gun to settle that altercation. You see, the energy that comes along with carrying a gun is very negative. You know the old saying, live by the gun, die by the gun? Well, that didn't just happen by coincidence. Most people who carry guns are asking and praying for negative energy to come into their lives, and they don't even know it. See, I bet you didn't know that there have been over 300 mass shootings that have happened in 2022 alone.
Now, Monday's tragedy comes after Congress passed the widest-ranging gun control bill in more than 30 years in response to mass shootings in Uvalde, Texas, and Buffalo, New York, that left a combined 31 people dead. According to data from the Gun Violence Archive, there have been 313 mass shootings and 15 mass murders in 2022. The organization defines mass shootings as 4 or more shot and or killed by gunfire. President Biden reacted to the shooting, vowing to keep fighting to end gun violence.
Before I left for Europe, I signed a law, the first real gun safety law in 30 years. And things will get better still, but not without more hard work together. You all heard what happened. You all heard what happened today. But each day, we're reminded there's nothing guaranteed about our democracy. Nothing guaranteed about our way of life. We have to fight for it, defend it, and earn it by voting.
So that's your answer to all this gun violence? To go vote? To simply go vote? Look at these pictures. Look at these faces. These are human lives. Lives that once meant so much. Husbands, daughters, sisters, brothers, fathers, mothers, aunties, cousins. These lives meant something to somebody. And I'm sure if you go down to the graveyard and talk to them about voting, they could care less about that. So to go vote, as if this is some kind of game, this is not a video game where you get shot and you fall out on the streets and you respawn. These are human lives. See, this makes me think of Babylon. And if you don't know what the city of Babylon is, let me tell you what it is. See, Babylon means gate of God. And Babylon was a city in ancient times. But Babylon just wasn't any old city. It was the richest city in that time. They were so prosperous, it looks like God blessed them himself. They were at the forefront of all the modern mathematics, writing, and science and technology that we still see today. In fact, they were the inventors of modern mathematics. They were the inventors of written language. And while they did thrive in their many advancements, their hearts became poisoned against the very God that blessed them in the first place. You see, this is the city where man worshiped themselves. And they worshiped themselves so much that they erected a statue dedicated to mankind. This is also the city where man decided to build a tower into heaven.
Written law, the Hammurabi Code. It may shock you to know that King Hammurabi was the first person to ever request that laws be written down. That seems pretty weird, right? Well, before this moment, most of the laws were just passed around by word of mouth, or they were implied. As you may expect, this left a lot of legal gray area for citizens, as they had no way to know for sure what was right or wrong. For example, Billy may tell you that it's illegal to own more than 50 piles of wheat. If you own more than that, you're supposed to give it away to the person closest to you. So Billy runs off with half your crop of wheat. Little did you know, Billy was lying. Billy robbed you. Okay, obviously that's a bit of a ridiculous way to think about it, but before Hammurabi decided to write down the laws, there was no surefire way to know what the king would consider being illegal. Hammurabi asked some of his workers to create giant pillars that would list the various laws of the land. At the time, there were just 282 laws, much different from today's world when there are thousands of laws we have to abide by.
This is the place where man began to believe more in his written law than God's law. See, the difference between man's law and God's law are as far apart as north and south. Man's law is written on paper because there are so many of them, and they constantly have to be changed and amended because they never seem to serve the purpose and intent that they were written for. God's law is written in a man's heart and DNA. It's an innate instinct to know not to kill your brother, to know not to bring harm to another human being, to know to love your fellow man. You don't need a law to understand that. You don't need a written law to understand God's law. It's in your DNA. Man's law changes with new regimes and various leaderships of the world. See, the reason their law constantly changes is because depending on who's in leadership and ruleship, they might have a different agenda to be pushed, so they constantly are changing the laws according to whatever agenda they're trying to carry out. God's law hasn't changed since the birth of man. There's no need to be changed or amended. Man's law is enforced with violence and corrupt injustice because man does not trust you, because he himself cannot be trusted. So he has to beat it into you. He has to wrongfully imprison you. He has to murder your people in the streets in order to enforce his law that is evil and corrupt in the first place. God's law is enforced by love, and he trusts his people to share in his ruleship with him. See, God is not selfish, so he trusts his people to reign here on earth like he does in the kingdom. For this reason, we should pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. See, America mirrors Babylon to a T. America was founded off the religion of Christianity and started off deeply based and rooted in the religious principles of this religion. For more information on why I'm air quoting religion and Christianity, see my later video that I'll be releasing soon. Just know that if you're watching my videos, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. Neither do I believe in religion or religious people. I believe in God, God's Son, his word, and the Holy Spirit. I believe in John chapter 4, verse 23 and 24. It reads like this: But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. That's what I believe. But back to the matter at hand. You see, America founded themselves off these religious principles. So to the fleshly eye, they seemed godly. But in the eyes of the spirit, they are everything but godly. They are counterfeit, just like the city of Babylon, a land offering freedom, liberty, and justice, calling out for your poor, broken, hungry, and tired to enter into the gates of God, when truly they are welcoming you into the gates of hell. See, nowadays, America is a melting pot of a plethora of religions and countless numbers of false idols and other gods, willing to adapt to and adopt any ideals from any false gods from anywhere. It's gotten so bad that they speak of the true living God as if he was a fairy or a fantasy or a fairy tale, as if he was a Harry Potter book or something. Which brings me to my next point, outlawing God. See, in 1962, the Engel versus Vitale case took place. Why is this case important? Because in 1962, the Supreme Court held that the Establishment Clause prohibited the reciting of a school-sponsored prayer in public schools. See, America got so beside itself that again, it began to worship more man's law than God's law, so it decided to legislate God out of schools. They didn't want to offend or alienate anyone who might not have the same beliefs. So many parents began teaching their children that it was not right to pray publicly, instead of teaching their children that God lives inside of you and not in the letters of any laws written on any pages. The fact that God lives in you means that no man can ever stop your communication with God. And since you actually carry God with you, they can never outlaw God out of schools. See, when we stop teaching our kids that they can't pray in schools, we also let them think that God is something that could be ruled in or ruled out. God is in me. Wherever I go, I carry God with me. If I go into a bad situation, God goes with me. I change the atmosphere. This is what we should have been teaching our children, that you can never outlaw God. But this did not stop the enemy from using this as a tool. He used this to start to impregnate the minds and the hearts of our youth across America. April 20th, 1999. Do you know what this date was? On this date, the first of many deadly school shootings rocked the nation at its core. That event was the Columbine High School Massacre. Now, if you're in my peer group or age range, you can remember that vividly. I can still remember the shock and disbelief of people as they were glued to their television, watching what seemed like a never-ending news cycle of reports about this shooting, one the likes of which we had never seen before. See, believe it or not, at that time, we were still sensitive to that type of violence and loss of life. But in the time since Columbine, there have been 304 fatal school shootings in the U.S. Shocking, huh? I think not. You see, since then, we have become desensitized to the loss of human life. Whether it's through wars in Iraq, violent video games, police injustice, and the list could go on. Whatever the case may be, we no longer value human life the way God intended. Thank you, man's law. And man's answer to this is simply to vote. To vote? Since the fall of Garden, man seeks every way to fix his own problems instead of trusting in God. And there will never be a law written by man that can fix the evil corruptions and going-ons in a man's heart. You see, the point of this video is to get you to wake up, not be afraid, and see the times of the world we are living in. Do you ever notice how preachers don't really preach from revelations in the Bible? Why is that? I imagine it's hard to talk about the actual times that we're living in and facing the beginning of God's judgment, which we are. And maybe, just maybe, if we don't teach it, we can act like it hasn't happened yet. We can pretend like we're waiting on the signs of this to happen. Oh, but I got news for you. It's here and we're living it out. See, in Revelations chapter 6, verse 3 and 4, it reads, "And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, 'Come and see.' And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given unto him that he sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword." Does that sound familiar? So in conclusion of this video, what will it be for you? Man's law or God's law? If you want to know my choice, look no further than Joshua chapter 24, verse 15. It reads, "And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." You see, it is, was, and forever will be God's law for me. Until next time, be blessed.